Question 1. The performance metrics show a consistent upward trend in suspended solids discharge from a specific tailings facility at Freeport, McMoRan's operations, potentially exceeding the limits stipulated in the facility's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, permit. Which of the following represents the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure compliance with U.S. environmental regulations? Option A. Focus on implementing operational adjustments to lower the discharge without first confirming the exact cause or regulatory implications with the relevant authorities. Option B. Initiate an immediate, thorough investigation involving environmental engineers and compliance officers to verify the data, assess the cause, and determine the extent of potential noncompliance with the NPDES permit. Option C. Assume the metrics are a temporary anomaly and continue normal operations while monitoring the trend for another reporting cycle. Option D. Temporarily reduce operational throughput at the facility to see if the metrics naturally improve, without immediately notifying regulatory agencies. The correct answer is B. Initiate an immediate, thorough investigation involving environmental engineers and compliance officers to verify the data, assess the cause, and determine the extent of potential noncompliance with the NPDES permit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with adherence to stringent environmental regulations, specifically those governing tailings management at Freeport, McMoRan's operations. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant U.S. federal and state environmental laws, such as the Clean Water Act and potentially state-specific mining and water quality regulations, to a situation where a performance metric indicates a potential deviation from established environmental standards. A hasty or uninformed decision could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and environmental harm. The correct approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation that prioritizes regulatory compliance. This means immediately initiating a detailed review of the performance metrics, cross-referencing them with the specific requirements of applicable environmental permits and regulations. The investigation should involve relevant technical experts, including environmental engineers and compliance officers, to accurately assess the situation and determine if a violation has occurred or is imminent. If the investigation confirms a potential or actual noncompliance, the immediate and transparent reporting of this to the relevant regulatory agencies, as mandated by law and company policy, is the critical next step. This proactive disclosure demonstrates good faith and allows for collaborative problem-solving, mitigating potential penalties. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metrics without a proper investigation, assuming they are erroneous or insignificant. This failure to investigate a potential regulatory issue is a direct violation of the duty to comply with environmental laws and permits. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to manage the metrics internally without disclosing potential issues to regulators, especially if the metrics suggest a breach of permit conditions or environmental standards. This constitutes a failure to report required information and could be viewed as an attempt to conceal a violation, leading to severe penalties. Finally, implementing corrective actions without first understanding the root cause and regulatory implications could lead to ineffective solutions or even exacerbate the problem, while still failing to address the regulatory reporting obligation. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This begins with recognizing the potential significance of the performance data. Next, engage internal subject matter experts to conduct a comprehensive assessment. Crucially, consult the specific regulatory requirements and permit conditions applicable to the operation. If the assessment indicates a potential or actual noncompliance, the immediate priority is to follow established protocols for reporting to regulatory bodies. This process emphasizes transparency, due diligence, and proactive engagement with authorities to ensure compliance and mitigate risks. Question 2. Examination of the data shows that Freeport McMoRan is in the process of acquiring a new mining operation. While the primary focus is on integrating operational efficiencies and financial systems, there is a critical need to ensure that all environmental practices at the acquired site strictly adhere to U.S. federal and state environmental regulations, including those overseen by the EPA. Which of the following approaches best ensures immediate and ongoing compliance with these environmental mandates? Option A. Rely on the acquired company's environmental management team to maintain compliance, with minimal oversight from Freeport McMoRan's corporate compliance department during the initial integration phase. Option B. Proceed with operational integration, assuming the acquired entity's existing environmental permits and practices are sufficient until a post-integration review can be scheduled. Option C. Prioritize the integration of financial and operational systems, deferring any detailed environmental compliance assessment until after the acquisition is fully finalized and operational. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental due diligence review of the acquired operation and immediately establish a compliance management system that aligns with both Freeport McMoRan's internal standards and applicable U.S. environmental laws. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental due diligence review of the acquired operation and immediately establish a compliance management system that aligns with both Freeport McMoRan's internal standards and applicable U.S. environmental laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a compliance officer at Freeport McMoRan due to the inherent tension between business objectives and regulatory adherence. The need to quickly integrate a new acquisition while ensuring all operations comply with stringent environmental regulations, specifically those governed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, under acts like the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, requires a meticulous and proactive approach. Failure to do so could result in significant fines, operational disruptions, and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to balance the urgency of integration with the non-negotiable mandate of environmental compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing a comprehensive environmental due diligence review and the immediate implementation of a robust compliance management system tailored to Freeport McMoRan's existing standards and the acquired entity's operations. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory requirements by proactively identifying and mitigating potential environmental risks before they manifest as violations. It aligns with the EPA's framework for environmental compliance, which emphasizes prevention, monitoring, and corrective action. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and environmental stewardship, safeguarding both the company and the surrounding communities. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on operational integration without a dedicated environmental compliance assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the specific mandates of environmental laws, such as the Clean Air Act's permitting requirements or the Clean Water Act's discharge limits. Such an approach risks immediate and ongoing noncompliance, leading to regulatory enforcement actions. Another incorrect approach, which involves assuming the acquired entity's existing environmental practices are sufficient without independent verification, is also professionally unacceptable. This assumption bypasses the critical step of assessing compliance against current U.S. federal and state environmental standards. It ignores the possibility of outdated practices or differing regulatory interpretations, thereby exposing Freeport McMoRan to significant legal and financial liabilities. A third incorrect approach, delaying the integration of environmental compliance measures until after the initial operational integration is complete, is professionally unacceptable. This delay creates a window of vulnerability where violations can occur undetected. It demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to embed compliance into the core of the integration process, which is contrary to best practices for risk management and regulatory adherence under EPA oversight. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes 1. Identifying all applicable regulatory frameworks, e.g., EPA regulations. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence, particularly in areas with high regulatory scrutiny like environmental compliance. 3. Prioritizing compliance integration as a critical path item in any business integration or acquisition. 4. Establishing clear lines of responsibility and accountability for compliance. 5. Implementing continuous monitoring and auditing mechanisms to ensure ongoing adherence. Question 3. Assessment of the compliance officer's responsibility at Freeport McMoRan when a project manager requests to begin site preparation for a new mineral processing facility, stating that all necessary environmental permits are in process and will be secured before operations commence, but without providing documentation of submitted applications or pending approvals. Option A. Halt all site preparation activities until written confirmation of all required environmental permits and approvals, along with their specific conditions, has been obtained and reviewed. Option B. Assume that existing environmental permits for a previously decommissioned facility on an adjacent site are transferable and sufficient for the new project. Option C. Advise the project manager to proceed with non-intrusive site preparation activities, such as clearing vegetation, while awaiting permit documentation. Option D. Proceed with site preparation based on the project manager's assurance, as the company has a history of successful permit acquisition. The correct answer is D. Proceed with site preparation based on the project manager's assurance, as the company has a history of successful permit acquisition. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a compliance officer at Freeport McMoRan due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory adherence. The pressure to expedite a project, especially one with potential environmental implications, requires careful judgment to ensure that all legal and ethical obligations are met without undue compromise. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the company's operational needs with its responsibility to comply with environmental regulations. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented review of all applicable environmental permits and regulations prior to commencing any site work. This includes verifying that all necessary approvals are in place, that the proposed activities align with the conditions of those permits, and that any potential new impacts are assessed and mitigated according to regulatory requirements. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal obligations of Freeport McMoRan under relevant environmental laws and regulations. It prioritizes compliance, risk mitigation, and responsible corporate conduct, which are fundamental ethical and legal duties. By ensuring all permits are current and all activities are compliant, the company avoids potential fines, legal challenges, reputational damage, and environmental harm. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with site preparation based on a verbal assurance from a project manager that permits are in process or will be secured shortly. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the formal regulatory review and approval process. It creates a significant risk of noncompliance, potentially leading to regulatory enforcement actions, including stop work orders, substantial fines, and legal liabilities. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for environmental stewardship and the rule of law. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that existing permits for a previous, similar project are automatically sufficient for the current one without a formal reevaluation. While past compliance can be a guide, environmental regulations and site conditions can change. Failing to verify the applicability and currency of existing permits for the specific scope of the new work is a regulatory failure. It risks operating outside the bounds of authorized activities, even if the general nature of the work is similar. A third incorrect approach would be to prioritize the project timeline over a complete environmental impact assessment, even if preliminary findings suggest potential issues. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. Environmental laws are designed to protect natural resources and public health, and circumventing or rushing these assessments undermines these protections. It exposes Freeport McMoRan to significant legal repercussions and reputational damage if environmental harm occurs or if the assessment is found to be inadequate. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This framework should prioritize understanding and adhering to all applicable laws and regulations. When faced with conflicting pressures, such as project deadlines versus regulatory requirements, a compliance professional must 1. Clearly identify all relevant legal and regulatory obligations. 2. Assess the potential risks and consequences of noncompliance. 3. Seek clarification and confirmation through official channels, not informal assurances. 4. Document all steps taken, communications, and decisions. 5. Escalate concerns to senior management or legal counsel if there is a significant risk of noncompliance or if pressure to bypass procedures is encountered. The ultimate goal is to ensure that business operations are conducted in a manner that is both profitable and legally and ethically sound. Question 4. Which approach would be most effective for Freeport McMoRan to implement a new environmental compliance software system across its diverse operational sites, ensuring both operational efficiency and strict adherence to U.S. environmental regulations? Option A, a complete overhaul of operational processes to accommodate the new software, with training provided only to management. Option B, a phased rollout of the software, starting with pilot sites, accompanied by comprehensive site-specific training for all relevant personnel. Option C, an immediate company-wide deployment of the software with a single, standardized training module delivered online. Option D, a gradual integration of the software into existing reporting workflows, relying primarily on IT support for troubleshooting. The correct answer is B, a phased rollout of the software, starting with pilot sites, accompanied by comprehensive, site-specific training for all relevant personnel. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in large corporations like Freeport McMoRan, where the implementation of new internal controls, particularly those related to environmental compliance, requires balancing operational efficiency with stringent regulatory adherence. The challenge lies in ensuring that the new system is not only technically sound, but also effectively integrated into existing workflows without creating undue burden or, more critically, compromising the integrity of environmental reporting. The pressure to meet production targets can sometimes create a conflict with the meticulous processes required for compliance, demanding a nuanced approach to implementation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased rollout of the new environmental compliance software, coupled with comprehensive training for all relevant personnel at Freeport McMoRan's operational sites. This strategy is crucial because it allows for iterative feedback and adjustments, minimizing disruption and ensuring that employees understand and can correctly utilize the new system. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in the United States, mandate accurate and timely reporting of environmental data. A phased implementation, supported by thorough training, directly addresses the risk of errors or omissions that could lead to non-compliance, fines, or reputational damage. This approach prioritizes both operational continuity and the robust execution of environmental stewardship responsibilities, aligning with the principles of responsible corporate conduct and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing the new system across all sites simultaneously without adequate pilot testing or site-specific adaptation risks overwhelming operational teams and increasing the likelihood of widespread errors. This could lead to significant compliance breaches, as regulatory bodies expect consistent adherence to environmental standards across all facilities. A failure to provide tailored training, assuming a one-size-fits-all approach, ignores the diverse operational realities at different Freeport McMoRan locations, potentially leaving some employees ill-equipped to use the software correctly, thus jeopardizing accurate data submission. Relying solely on IT support, without involving operational and environmental compliance teams in the rollout process, disconnects the technical implementation from the practical application and regulatory requirements, increasing the risk of overlooking critical compliance nuances. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such implementation challenges should adopt a risk-based, iterative approach. This involves identifying critical compliance points, assessing potential points of failure during implementation, and developing mitigation strategies. Prioritizing stakeholder engagement, particularly with those directly responsible for compliance and operations, is essential for gathering practical insights and fostering buy-in. A structured rollout, including pilot programs and continuous feedback loops, allows for early detection and correction of issues. Adherence to established regulatory guidelines for environmental reporting and data management should be the guiding principle, ensuring that any new system or process enhances, rather than hinders, compliance efforts. Question 5. Implementation of Freeport McMoRan's insider trading policy requires employees to navigate situations where they may possess information that could influence investment decisions. Consider an employee who overhears a conversation between senior executives discussing a significant, undisclosed mineral discovery that is expected to substantially increase the company's stock value. The employee has not been privy to the official announcement of this discovery. Which of the following actions best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations of a Freeport McMoRan employee? Option A. Discuss the overheard information with a trusted financial advisor to get their opinion on the potential stock performance before making any trading decisions. Option B. Immediately purchase shares of Freeport McMoRan stock. believing the discovery will lead to a significant price increase and that the information is valuable. Option C. Sell existing shares of Freeport McMoRan stock to avoid potential losses if the market reacts negatively to future, undisclosed operational challenges that might be discussed internally. Option D. Refrain from trading Freeport McMoRan stock and avoid disclosing the overheard information to anyone outside of the company's designated compliance channels until the information is publicly announced. Correct answer is B. Immediately purchase shares of Freeport McMoRan stock, believing the discovery will lead to a significant price increase and that the information is valuable. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Freeport McMoRan employees regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of using non-public information for personal gain. The core difficulty lies in distinguishing between legitimate business discussions and the misuse of sensitive, material information that could impact the company's stock price or competitive standing. Employees are entrusted with confidential data, and maintaining the integrity of financial markets and corporate governance requires strict adherence to insider trading regulations. The pressure to perform financially, coupled with the availability of privileged information, creates a complex environment where ethical boundaries can be blurred if not clearly understood and upheld. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Freeport McMoRan's internal policies and relevant U.S. securities laws, specifically the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and SEC regulations concerning insider trading. This means refraining from trading or tipping off others about material non-public information, MNPI, until it has been publicly disclosed. Employees must exercise due diligence to ascertain whether information is indeed MNPI, and if in doubt, err on the side of caution by not trading. This approach is ethically sound as it promotes fair markets and prevents unfair advantages, and it is legally mandated to avoid severe penalties for both the individual and the company. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any information shared within a business context is permissible for trading purposes. This fails to recognize the distinction between general business knowledge and specific, material, non-public information. Another incorrect approach is to rely on personal judgment about the materiality of information without consulting company policy or legal counsel, as individual perceptions can be subjective and fall short of legal standards. Furthermore, believing that a tip from a colleague, even if seemingly casual, is exempt from insider trading rules is a critical ethical and legal misstep. All these approaches risk violating the spirit and letter of insider trading laws, potentially leading to investigations, fines, and reputational damage for both the employee and Freeport McMoRan. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should first consult Freeport McMoRan's Code of Conduct and insider trading policy. If there is any ambiguity regarding the nature of information or the permissibility of a trade, seeking guidance from the company's legal or compliance department is paramount. A robust decision-making process involves a clear understanding of what constitutes MNPI, the prohibition against trading on such information, and the duty to report potential violations. Prioritizing ethical conduct and regulatory compliance over potential personal financial gain is the cornerstone of professional integrity in the financial industry. Question 6. Compliance review shows that a Freeport McMoRan site supervisor observed a visible sheen on a nearby creek during a routine inspection. The supervisor suspects it may be related to recent maintenance on a nearby pipeline, but is not certain of the source or the exact volume of any potential discharge. The supervisor is concerned about the operational disruption and potential costs associated with a formal spill report and decides to wait until the end of the shift to gather more information internally before deciding whether to report it. Option A. Rely on the field team's informal assessment of the sheen's potential impact to determine the necessity of external reporting. Option B. Conduct a thorough internal investigation to definitively identify the source and volume of the sheen before making any external reports. Option C. Classify the sheen as minor and not requiring immediate external reporting based on the supervisor's initial assessment of its insignificance. Option D. Immediately report the observed sheen to the National Response Center and the relevant state environmental agency, as per regulatory requirements, and initiate internal investigation concurrently. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the observed sheen to the National Response Center and the relevant state environmental agency, as per regulatory requirements, and initiate internal investigation concurrently. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the stringent requirements of environmental compliance, particularly concerning the reporting of potential spills. Freeport McMoRan, as a large mining operation, faces constant scrutiny regarding its environmental impact. The pressure to minimize downtime and associated costs can create a temptation to delay or downplay reporting obligations. However, regulatory frameworks, such as those enforced by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, under acts like the Clean Water Act and CERCLA, mandate prompt and accurate reporting of spills that could impact navigable waters or pose a risk to human health and the environment. Failure to report, or to report inaccurately, can lead to severe penalties, reputational damage, and long-term remediation liabilities. Careful judgment is required to balance operational needs with legal and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the observed sheen to the relevant regulatory authorities, even with initial uncertainty about its origin or severity. This aligns with the principle of proactive environmental stewardship and adherence to regulatory mandates. Specifically, under EPA regulations, any discharge of a pollutant into navigable waters that may reasonably be expected to harm the environment must be reported immediately. This includes reporting to the National Response Center, NRC. By reporting promptly, Freeport McMoRan demonstrates good faith, allows for timely assessment and containment by environmental agencies, and mitigates potential penalties associated with delayed or non-disclosure. This approach prioritizes compliance and environmental protection over short-term cost savings or operational convenience. An incorrect approach would be to delay reporting while conducting an internal investigation to definitively identify the source and extent of the sheen. This delays the regulatory notification process, potentially allowing a minor incident to escalate into a significant environmental problem before authorities are aware. The regulatory failure here is the violation of immediate reporting requirements. Another incorrect approach is to classify the sheen as insignificant without consulting environmental compliance personnel or regulatory guidelines. This constitutes a failure to exercise due diligence and a potential misrepresentation of the situation to regulatory bodies. The ethical failure lies in potentially withholding critical information that could protect the environment and public health. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal evidence from the field team to determine if reporting is necessary, bypassing established internal reporting protocols and regulatory triggers. This undermines the integrity of the compliance program and exposes the company to significant risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of regulatory reporting thresholds, robust internal communication channels between operations and environmental compliance teams, and a commitment to transparency. When an incident like a sheen is observed, the immediate steps should be to secure the area, gather preliminary information, and then, critically, to consult with the designated environmental compliance officer or department. This team is responsible for interpreting regulatory requirements and initiating the appropriate reporting procedures. The decision to report should err on the side of caution, prioritizing compliance and environmental protection. Question 7. During the evaluation of potential operational adjustments at Freeport McMoRan facility to improve wastewater treatment efficiency, a project manager proposes implementing a new filtration system. However, the project manager is unsure if the proposed system's effluent quality will strictly meet the discharge limits stipulated in the facility's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System (NPDES) permit. As the permit's parameters are highly specific and complex, which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with U.S. environmental regulations? Option A. Proceed with the new filtration system if it is widely used in similar mining operations across the U.S. and is generally considered to be effective. Option B. Implement the new filtration system and conduct post-installation monitoring to confirm compliance, assuming minor deviations are acceptable if operational benefits are significant. Option C. Rely on the judgment of the engineering team to determine if the new system is likely to meet permit requirements, based on their general experience with wastewater treatment. Option D. Halt the implementation of the new filtration system until a detailed review of the specific NPDES permit requirements is conducted. An expert legal and environmental consultation is obtained to assess the system's compliance. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the new filtration system if it is widely used in similar mining operations across the U.S. and is generally considered to be effective. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing interests. The company's need for efficient operations and compliance with environmental regulations, specifically concerning the discharge of wastewater from Freeport McMoRan's mining operations. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying complex environmental standards to a real-world operational context, where deviations can have significant legal, financial, and reputational consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed operational adjustments do not inadvertently lead to non-compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the specific permits and regulations governing wastewater discharge for the relevant Freeport McMoRan facility. This includes understanding the permitted discharge limits, monitoring requirements, and reporting obligations under applicable U.S. federal and state environmental laws, such as the Clean Water Act and its implementing regulations. The approach of seeking expert legal and environmental consultation ensures that any operational changes are evaluated against the precise legal requirements, minimizing the risk of violations. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining compliance and avoiding penalties. An incorrect approach would be to assume that standard industry practices are sufficient without verifying them against the specific regulatory framework applicable to Freeport McMoRan's operations. This fails to acknowledge that permits and regulations are site-specific and can impose stricter requirements than general guidelines. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize operational efficiency or cost savings over strict adherence to environmental permits. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and can lead to significant enforcement actions, fines, and damage to the company's reputation. Furthermore, making assumptions about the interpretation of complex environmental regulations without consulting qualified professionals is a direct violation of due diligence and professional responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant legal and regulatory obligations. This is followed by a detailed assessment of the operational context and potential impacts. When faced with ambiguity or complex interpretations, the framework dictates seeking expert advice from legal counsel and environmental specialists. The final decision must prioritize compliance and ethical conduct, even if it entails higher short-term costs or operational adjustments. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the proposed expansion of Freeport McMoRan's copper mine in Arizona may have significant impacts on local water resources and indigenous cultural heritage sites. Which of the following approaches best aligns with U.S. federal and state environmental regulations and ethical corporate conduct for managing these identified risks? Option A. Rely solely on historical environmental data from similar mining operations in other regions to predict potential impacts, without specific site-specific studies or direct community engagement for this Freeport McMoRan project. Option B. Implement a comprehensive environmental and cultural impact assessment involving independent experts, regulatory agencies, and direct, ongoing consultation with affected indigenous communities and local stakeholders throughout the planning and implementation phases. Option C. Prioritize the economic benefits of the expansion and proceed with the project, addressing any environmental or cultural issues that arise on a reactive basis to minimize upfront costs. Option D. Conduct a limited environmental impact assessment focusing only on quantifiable water quality metrics, and engage with indigenous representatives only after the expansion plans are finalized to address any concerns. Correct answer is D. Conduct a limited environmental impact assessment focusing only on quantifiable water quality metrics, and engage with indigenous representatives only after the expansion plans are finalized to address any concerns. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing interests, the company's operational needs, and the potential environmental and community impacts of a significant project. Freeport McMoRan, as a large mining corporation, operates under stringent environmental regulations and community engagement expectations. The challenge lies in ensuring that risk assessment procedures are not merely a procedural hurdle, but a robust mechanism for identifying and mitigating potential harm, thereby upholding legal compliance and corporate social responsibility. Careful judgment is required to interpret complex data, anticipate unforeseen consequences, and make decisions that are both economically viable and ethically sound. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive engagement with all relevant stakeholders, including regulatory bodies, local communities, and environmental experts, throughout the entire project lifecycle, from initial planning to decommissioning. This approach ensures that potential risks are identified early, thoroughly assessed, and addressed through mitigation strategies that comply with all applicable U.S. federal and state environmental laws and regulations, such as the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and the Clean Water Act. It also aligns with ethical principles of transparency, fairness, and due diligence, fostering trust and minimizing the likelihood of future disputes or legal challenges. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on meeting minimum regulatory compliance, without genuine stakeholder engagement, risks overlooking critical local concerns or emerging environmental issues. This could lead to regulatory violations, fines, project delays, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term cost savings over thorough environmental impact studies would be a direct contravention of U.S. environmental laws and could result in significant penalties and long-term liabilities. Furthermore, an approach that dismisses community feedback or concerns without proper investigation demonstrates a lack of ethical consideration and can erode community trust, potentially leading to significant operational disruptions and legal opposition. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and the specific environmental and social context of the project. This involves actively seeking out and integrating diverse perspectives, conducting rigorous scientific assessments, and developing adaptive management plans. The process should be iterative, allowing for adjustments based on new information or feedback, and always prioritizing the long-term sustainability and responsible operation of the company. Question 9. Performance analysis shows a significant operational disruption at one of Freeport McMoRan's key mining sites due to unforeseen geological conditions. While the immediate impact on production is clear, the long-term financial implications and the exact timeline for full operational recovery are still uncertain. What is the most appropriate course of action for Freeport McMoRan's management to ensure compliance with U.S. securities regulations and maintain investor confidence? Option A. Delay public disclosure until the full financial impact and recovery timeline are definitively quantified, to avoid premature or inaccurate reporting. Option B. Issue a brief internal memo to employees and wait for further developments before considering external communication. Option C. Disclose the information only to major institutional investors and analysts to manage market reaction. Option D. Proactively engage with legal and compliance teams to assess materiality and prepare timely, accurate disclosures in accordance with SEC regulations. Correct answer is D. Proactively engage with legal and compliance teams to assess materiality and prepare timely, accurate disclosures in accordance with SEC regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Freeport McMoRan, as a publicly traded company operating in the mining sector, is subject to stringent U.S. federal securities laws and regulations, particularly those enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate disclosure of material information with the operational realities of a complex global business. Misinterpreting or misapplying these disclosure requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. Careful judgment is required to determine what constitutes material information and the appropriate timing and method for its disclosure. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with legal and compliance teams to assess the potential materiality of the operational disruption and to prepare disclosures that are both accurate and compliant with SEC Regulation G and other relevant disclosure rules. This approach prioritizes transparency and adherence to regulatory frameworks, ensuring that investors receive timely information about events that could reasonably be expected to influence their investment decisions. Specifically, Regulation G requires that when a company publicly discloses any material non-GAAP financial measure, it must also disclose the most directly comparable GAAP financial measure and a reconciliation of the differences. While this scenario doesn't explicitly mention non-GAAP measures, the underlying principle of accurate and transparent disclosure of material events is paramount. The prompts focus on regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for exam. Freeport McMoRan hiring assessment test implies adherence to U.S. securities laws. An incorrect approach would be to delay disclosure until the full extent of the operational disruption is definitively known and quantified. This failure to provide timely information, even if preliminary, can violate SEC disclosure obligations, which often require prompt reporting of material events. Investors are entitled to information that could impact their investment decisions as soon as it becomes reasonably available. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the information only through internal channels or to a limited group of stakeholders without a public filing or press release. This selective disclosure constitutes selective disclosure and is a violation of Regulation FD, Fair Disclosure, which mandates that material non-public information be disclosed to the public broadly. Finally, an approach that downplays the potential impact of the disruption without a thorough assessment of its materiality, based on speculation rather than a reasoned analysis informed by legal and compliance expertise, would also be professionally unsound and potentially violate disclosure obligations. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-step approach. 1. Immediate notification to the legal and compliance departments upon identification of a potentially material event. 2. Collaborative assessment with these departments to determine the materiality of the event under SEC rules. 3. Development of a disclosure strategy that ensures broad public dissemination of accurate and complete information in a timely manner, adhering to all applicable regulations. 4. Continuous monitoring and updating of disclosures as more information becomes available. Question 10. Quality control measures reveal a potential discrepancy in the reported production volumes for a key mineral at one of Freeport McMoRan's major mining sites. While the initial internal review suggests the discrepancy might be due to a data entry error, the magnitude of the potential misstatement could be material to the company's financial statements. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Freeport McMoRan's management? Option A. Instruct the site management to correct the data entry error immediately and update the production reports without further external consultation, assuming it is a minor issue. Option B. Defer any action until the next quarterly reporting cycle, at which point the discrepancy can be incorporated into the regular financial reporting process. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive, independent investigation into the discrepancy, involving internal audit, legal, and compliance departments, and prepare for potential disclosure to relevant regulatory bodies. Option D. Issue a public statement acknowledging a potential reporting issue and promising a full investigation, without providing specific details to avoid speculation. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive, independent investigation into the discrepancy, involving internal audit, legal, and compliance departments, and prepare for potential disclosure to relevant regulatory bodies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Freeport McMoRan, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent reporting requirements and ethical standards designed to ensure transparency and investor confidence. The discovery of a potential misstatement, even if unintentional, triggers a complex decision-making process that must prioritize accuracy and integrity in financial reporting. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action when faced with incomplete information and the potential for significant consequences. The correct approach involves a thorough and systematic investigation, followed by prompt and transparent disclosure to relevant authorities and stakeholders. This approach prioritizes the integrity of financial reporting and upholds the company's ethical obligations. By initiating an independent review and engaging with legal and compliance teams, Freeport McMoRan demonstrates a commitment to uncovering the truth and rectifying any errors. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining trust with investors, regulators, and the public. It aligns with the principles of accurate financial disclosure and the duty to report material information in a timely manner, as expected under U.S. securities laws and professional accounting standards. An incorrect approach that involves delaying the investigation or attempting to downplay the significance of the potential misstatement would be professionally unacceptable. Such actions could be interpreted as an attempt to mislead stakeholders or conceal information, leading to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal liabilities. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately making a public announcement without a proper investigation, could lead to the dissemination of inaccurate or incomplete information, causing undue alarm and market disruption. This would also fail to demonstrate due diligence and a responsible approach to addressing the issue. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. This framework should begin with a clear understanding of the facts and the potential implications. It should then involve consulting with relevant internal experts, legal, compliance, accounting, and if necessary, external advisors. The process must prioritize adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical principles, ensuring that all actions are documented and defensible. Transparency and timely communication, guided by expert advice, are paramount in navigating such complex challenges. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that a new operational procedure at a Freeport McMoRan mine site may involve the disposal of a novel byproduct. Before implementing this procedure, what is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the site manager to ensure adherence to U.S. environmental regulations? Option A. Proactively consult with Freeport McMoRan's environmental compliance team to understand specific regulatory requirements for this byproduct and secure any necessary permits before proceeding with disposal. Option B. Immediately implement the disposal procedure, assuming it aligns with general waste management practices, and address any potential compliance issues if they arise later. Option C. Proceed with the disposal, but only after informally confirming with a colleague who has experience with similar waste streams that it is likely acceptable. Option D. Expedite the disposal process by informing the environmental compliance team that the byproduct has minimal environmental impact, thereby seeking a quicker approval. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement the disposal procedure, assuming it aligns with general waste management practices, and address any potential compliance issues if they arise later. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Freeport McMoRan employees due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the strict adherence to environmental regulations. The pressure to meet production targets can create an environment where shortcuts might seem appealing, but the consequences of non-compliance, including significant fines, reputational damage, and potential legal action, are severe. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing pressures and ensure that all actions are within the bounds of applicable environmental laws and company policy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with the environmental compliance team to understand the specific requirements for the proposed waste disposal method. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and responsible corporate citizenship. By seeking expert guidance and ensuring all necessary permits and documentation are in place before proceeding, Freeport McMoRan mitigates the risk of environmental violations. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and the legal obligation to operate in an environmentally sound manner, as mandated by U.S. environmental laws such as the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, and the Clean Water Act, which govern the handling and disposal of waste materials. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the disposal without consulting the environmental team and obtaining necessary permits represents a failure to exercise due diligence. This approach disregards the potential for the waste to be classified as hazardous or to require specific treatment, leading to violations of RCRA or other relevant environmental statutes. It prioritizes expediency over compliance, creating significant legal and financial risks for Freeport McMoRan. Assuming the disposal method is acceptable based on past practices without verifying current regulations is also a flawed approach. Environmental regulations are subject to change, and relying on outdated knowledge can lead to unintentional noncompliance. This demonstrates a lack of ongoing commitment to regulatory awareness and could result in violations of updated environmental standards. Seeking to expedite the process by downplaying the potential environmental impact to the compliance team is ethically unsound and professionally irresponsible. This approach attempts to circumvent the regulatory process and undermines the integrity of environmental oversight. It can lead to the approval of non-compliant disposal methods, exposing Freeport McMoRan to severe penalties and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Freeport McMoRan should adopt a proactive and compliance-first mindset. When faced with operational decisions that have potential environmental implications, the decision-making framework should prioritize understanding and adhering to all applicable U.S. environmental laws and regulations. This involves 1. Identifying potential environmental impacts of proposed actions. 2. Consulting relevant internal departments, e.g., environmental compliance and external regulatory bodies. 3. Verifying current regulatory requirements and obtaining all necessary permits and approvals. 4. Documenting all steps taken to ensure compliance. 5. Prioritizing long-term sustainability and legal adherence over short-term operational gains. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that Freeport McMoRan is considering several approaches to manage its mining waste disposal in compliance with environmental regulations. Which approach best reflects a commitment to robust environmental stewardship and regulatory adherence? Option A. Seeking clarification from environmental regulatory bodies and engaging independent environmental consultants to develop and implement a disposal strategy that exceeds minimum compliance standards. Option B. Adopting a waste disposal protocol that has been used historically by the company, assuming it remains technically compliant with current regulations. Option C. Postponing the adoption of new waste management technologies until operational disruptions are minimized and cost benefits are clearly demonstrated. Option D. Implementing a waste disposal method that meets the minimum legal requirements while being the most cost-effective option. The correct answer is D. Implementing a waste disposal method that meets the minimum legal requirements while being the most cost-effective option. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Freeport McMoRan, as a publicly traded company operating in a highly regulated industry, must navigate complex environmental compliance requirements. The challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness with the absolute necessity of adhering to stringent environmental regulations, particularly concerning the disposal of mining waste. Failure to do so can result in significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is not only compliant but also sustainable and ethically sound. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with regulatory bodies to understand and implement best practices for waste management, even if it entails higher initial costs. This demonstrates a commitment to environmental stewardship and regulatory compliance, which is paramount for a company like Freeport McMoRan. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of responsible corporate citizenship and the legal obligations under relevant environmental statutes, such as the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, in the United States, which governs the management of hazardous and non-hazardous solid waste. Prioritizing compliance and seeking expert guidance ensures that waste disposal methods meet or exceed legal standards, thereby mitigating risks. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings by adopting a less stringent but technically compliant waste disposal method is professionally unacceptable. It might appear to meet minimum legal requirements. It fails to demonstrate due diligence and a commitment to environmental best practices. This could lead to unforeseen environmental impacts or future regulatory scrutiny if the chosen method is later deemed insufficient or if regulations evolve. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying implementation of updated waste management protocols due to perceived operational burdens, is also professionally flawed. This demonstrates a disregard for the evolving regulatory landscape and a failure to prioritize environmental protection, potentially exposing Freeport McMoRan to significant liabilities. Finally, an approach that relies solely on internal assessments without seeking external validation or regulatory clarification risks misinterpreting complex regulations or overlooking critical compliance nuances, leading to potential violations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable environmental regulations. This should be followed by an assessment of potential operational impacts and costs associated with various compliance strategies. Crucially, engaging with regulatory agencies for clarification and guidance, and consulting with environmental experts should be integral to the process. The ultimate decision must prioritize long-term compliance, environmental protection, and corporate responsibility over short-term cost advantages. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual fluctuation in wastewater discharge parameters at Freeport McMoRan facility, potentially exceeding permitted limits under the Clean Water Act. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Ignore the fluctuation, assuming it is a temporary anomaly or a sensor malfunction, and continue normal operations without further investigation. Option B. Independently attempt to adjust operational controls to correct the fluctuation without notifying supervisors or the environmental compliance team. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the monitoring data, cross-reference with historical data and operational logs, and consult with the Environmental Compliance Department to determine the nature and significance of the fluctuation before taking further action. Option D. Immediately initiate a comprehensive, facility-wide shutdown and extensive remediation efforts to address the potential exceedance. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a comprehensive, facility-wide shutdown and extensive remediation efforts to address the potential exceedance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Freeport McMoRan to interpret and act upon information from a monitoring system that may indicate potential noncompliance with environmental regulations. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement for thorough investigation and adherence to established procedures, all within the framework of U.S. environmental law. A hasty or uninformed response could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, or an ineffective remediation effort. Conversely, inaction or delayed action could exacerbate environmental harm and result in more severe consequences. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action based on the nature and severity of the detected anomaly. The correct approach involves a systematic process of verification and escalation. This begins with a thorough review of the monitoring data to understand the specific parameters, the extent of deviation, and potential causes. Following this, it is crucial to consult internal policies and relevant sections of the U.S. environmental regulatory framework, such as the Clean Water Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA), depending on the nature of the potential issue, to determine reporting obligations and required corrective actions. The next step is to engage with the designated environmental compliance team or supervisor to report the findings and collaboratively develop an appropriate response plan. This ensures that actions taken are compliant, effective, and documented, aligning with the principles of responsible environmental stewardship and regulatory adherence expected of a company like Freeport McMoRan. An incorrect approach of immediately initiating extensive and costly remediation without proper verification fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality and efficient resource allocation. It bypasses the necessary investigative steps to confirm the issue and its root cause, potentially leading to unnecessary expenditure and disruption. Furthermore, it may overlook specific reporting requirements that are triggered by the initial detection, rather than by the subsequent, unverified remediation. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the monitoring system's alert due to a belief that it might be a false positive, without any form of investigation or consultation, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This inaction directly contravenes the proactive compliance obligations mandated by U.S. environmental laws, which require entities to monitor their operations and report potential violations. Such an approach could lead to undetected environmental damage and severe penalties if the alert was indeed indicative of a genuine issue. A third incorrect approach of independently attempting to fix the issue without involving the compliance department or supervisors is also professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established internal controls and reporting structures, which are designed to ensure regulatory compliance and manage risk effectively. It can lead to inconsistent or inadequate corrective actions and a failure to meet formal reporting deadlines to regulatory agencies, thereby exposing Freeport McMoRan to significant legal and financial liabilities. The professional reasoning process for such situation should involve a structured approach. First, acknowledge and document the alert from the monitoring system. Second, conduct a preliminary assessment to understand the nature and potential severity of the deviation. Third, consult relevant internal policies and applicable U.S. environmental regulations. Fourth, engage with the appropriate internal stakeholders, such as the environmental compliance team or management, to report the findings and discuss potential next steps. Fifth, follow the established procedures for investigation, reporting, and corrective action, ensuring all activities are thoroughly documented. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and aligned with the company's commitment to environmental responsibility. Question 14. The efficiency study reveals that a new operational process at Freeport McMoRan's mining sites could significantly reduce production costs by an estimated 15% over the next fiscal year. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action regarding the disclosure of this information? Option A. Conduct a thorough internal assessment to determine the materiality of the cost savings and consult with legal and investor relations teams before any public disclosure. Option B. Hold off on any public disclosure until the new process has been fully implemented and its impact is definitively quantifiable. Option C. Share the preliminary findings with a select group of institutional investors to gauge their reaction before making a public announcement. Option D. Immediately issue a press release detailing the potential cost savings and the new process, while simultaneously informing key financial analysts. Correct answer is D. Immediately issue a press release detailing the potential cost savings and the new process, while simultaneously informing key financial analysts. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Freeport McMoRan, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent U.S. federal securities laws and regulations, particularly those enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. The efficiency study's findings, if material, could impact the company's financial performance and stock valuation. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate disclosure and internal control measures to ensure compliance with the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and its associated rules, such as Regulation FD, fair disclosure. This requires a delicate balance between operational improvements and timely, accurate, and non-discriminatory public disclosure of material information. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the materiality of the efficiency study's findings. If the findings are deemed material, they must be promptly and broadly disseminated to the public, typically through a press release or SEC filing, e.g., Form 8K. This aligns with the principles of Regulation FD, which prohibits selective disclosure of material non-public information to certain individuals or entities, like analysts or institutional investors, before it is made available to the general public. The regulatory justification is to ensure a level playing field for all investors. Furthermore, internal controls must be reviewed and potentially enhanced to ensure that such information is handled appropriately within the company, and that future disclosures are managed effectively. An incorrect approach would be to delay public disclosure of material findings while selectively sharing them with a select group of analysts or investors. This violates Regulation FD by engaging in selective disclosure, potentially leading to insider trading concerns and significant penalties for Freeport McMoRan. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings as non-material without a rigorous, documented assessment, especially if there is a reasonable possibility that the information could influence an investor's decision. This could lead to a failure to disclose material information, a violation of Section 10(b) of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and Rule 10b-5, which prohibit fraud and misrepresentation in connection with the purchase or sale of securities. Finally, implementing operational changes based on the study without considering the disclosure implications would be a failure to integrate compliance into business processes, risking regulatory scrutiny. The professional reasoning process should involve a cross-functional team, including legal counsel, investor relations, finance, and relevant operational departments. This team should first establish clear criteria for materiality based on SEC guidance. If materiality is identified, the next step is to develop a communication strategy that ensures broad public dissemination before any selective communication occurs. Regular training on disclosure obligations and internal controls is also crucial for all personnel involved in generating or handling potentially material information. Question 15. Investigation of potential impacts from a new tailings dam construction project at Freeport McMoRan mine site has identified a novel, uncharacterized geological formation that may pose an unforeseen risk of groundwater contamination. What is the most appropriate course of action for the project management team under U.S. environmental regulatory frameworks? Option A. Implement a proprietary, in-house developed containment system that the engineering team believes is sufficient, without external regulatory review. Option B. Proceed with construction as planned, implementing standard containment protocols, and monitor for any contamination after operations begin. Option C. Inform senior management of the potential risk and await their directive on how to proceed, prioritizing project timelines. Option D. Immediately halt construction and initiate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, including consultation with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and relevant state environmental agencies to determine appropriate mitigation strategies before proceeding. The correct answer is B. Proceed with construction as planned, implementing standard containment protocols, and monitor for any contamination after operations begin. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Freeport McMoRan employees due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the strict adherence to environmental regulations. The pressure to meet production targets can create an environment where shortcuts might seem appealing, but the consequences of non-compliance with environmental laws are severe, including significant fines, reputational damage, and potential operational shutdowns. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with regulatory bodies. This means not only identifying potential environmental risks, but also initiating communication with the relevant U.S. environmental agencies to understand their expectations and to seek guidance on best practices for mitigating these risks. This approach demonstrates a commitment to compliance and a willingness to collaborate, which is often viewed favorably by regulators. It aligns with the principles of environmental stewardship and corporate responsibility, which are increasingly important in the mining industry and are often implicitly or explicitly supported by U.S. environmental laws and agency guidelines. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to self-assess and implement mitigation strategies without consulting regulatory authorities. This could lead to inadequate measures that fail to meet legal requirements, or it could be perceived as an attempt to circumvent oversight. Another incorrect approach would be to delay reporting or addressing the identified risks, hoping they might resolve themselves or go unnoticed. This is a direct violation of many environmental reporting obligations and demonstrates a lack of due diligence, potentially leading to severe penalties. Finally, an approach that prioritizes production over environmental concerns, even if it means operating in a gray area of compliance, is ethically and legally unsound and exposes Freeport McMoRan to significant risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific U.S. environmental laws applicable to Freeport McMoRan's operations, conducting thorough risk assessments, and proactively engaging with regulatory agencies for clarification and approval of mitigation plans. When faced with potential conflicts, the framework should dictate seeking expert legal and environmental advice and erring on the side of caution and transparency. Question 16. The audit findings indicate a potential control weakness at Freeport McMoRan related to the segregation of duties within the accounts payable process, where a single individual has the ability to both initiate and approve vendor payments. What is the most appropriate course of action to address this finding? Option A. Implement a compensating control that requires a designated supervisor to review and approve all payment batches initiated by the individual, along with periodic independent testing of this supervisory review process. Option B. Classify the finding as a low-risk issue and rely on the company's general code of conduct to deter any potential misconduct. Option C. Reassign the responsibility for initiating vendor payments to a different individual while allowing the original individual to retain the authority to approve payments. Option D. Document the finding in the audit report and monitor for any instances of fraud or error in the future, without implementing immediate corrective actions. The correct answer is A. Implement a compensating control that requires a designated supervisor to review and approve all payment batches initiated by the individual, along with periodic independent testing of this supervisory review process. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of maintaining robust internal controls and compliance with regulatory expectations. Freeport McMoRan, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent reporting and internal control requirements, particularly under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, SOX, if operating within the U.S. jurisdiction. The audit findings highlight a potential breakdown in segregation of duties, a fundamental internal control principle designed to prevent fraud and error. The challenge lies in addressing the control deficiency without unduly disrupting critical business processes or incurring excessive costs, while ensuring that the remediation plan is effective and sustainable. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment and the implementation of compensating controls. This means thoroughly evaluating the specific risks associated with the identified control gap, such as the potential for unauthorized transactions or financial misstatements. Based on this assessment, appropriate compensating controls, which may include enhanced supervisory review, independent reconciliations, or system-based access restrictions, should be designed and implemented. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the root cause of the audit finding by mitigating the identified risks. It aligns with the principles of effective internal control frameworks, such as COSO, and regulatory expectations that require management to establish and maintain adequate internal controls over financial reporting. The focus is on risk mitigation and control effectiveness, which are paramount for SOX compliance and maintaining investor confidence. An incorrect approach would be to simply document the deficiency without implementing any remediation. This fails to address the underlying risk and leaves Freeport McMoRan vulnerable to potential fraud or error, violating the company's responsibility to maintain effective internal controls. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a compensating control that is not commensurate with the identified risk. For example, a superficial review that does not adequately scrutinize the transactions in question would not be effective and would still represent a control deficiency. This approach fails to meet the regulatory requirement for effective controls. A third incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit finding as a minor issue without proper due diligence. This demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a disregard for the importance of internal controls, potentially leading to more significant issues down the line, and a failure to comply with regulatory mandates. The professional decision-making process in such situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the audit finding and its potential implications. This involves engaging with the auditors to clarify the scope and severity of the deficiency. Subsequently, a risk-based assessment should be conducted to determine the potential impact of the control gap on financial reporting and operational integrity. Based on this assessment, management must develop and implement a remediation plan that is both practical and effective in mitigating the identified risks. This plan should be documented, and its effectiveness should be periodically monitored and tested. This systematic approach ensures that control deficiencies are addressed in a timely and appropriate manner, upholding regulatory compliance and the integrity of financial reporting. Question 17. The assessment process reveals that during a routine inspection at Freeport McMoRan facility, a minor but reportable spill of a regulated substance occurred. Internal discussions among site management are ongoing regarding the exact volume and potential environmental impact, with some suggesting a delay in external reporting until a more definitive internal assessment is complete. What is the most appropriate course of action for the responsible Freeport McMoRan employee? Option A. Inform only internal environmental compliance officers and await their directive on whether and when to contact external agencies. Option B. Wait for the internal investigation to conclude and a comprehensive report to be finalized before notifying any external regulatory bodies. Option C. Immediately report the spill to the relevant environmental regulatory agency as per established protocols, providing all known details and committing to follow up with more precise information as it becomes available. Option D. Report the spill to the regulatory agency, but only disclose the minimal known details, omitting any information that might be subject to interpretation or further internal review. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the spill to the relevant environmental regulatory agency as per established protocols, providing all known details and committing to follow up with more precise information as it becomes available. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts between internal company directives and external regulatory obligations, specifically concerning the reporting of environmental incidents. Freeport McMoRan, as a publicly traded company operating in the mining sector, is subject to stringent environmental regulations. The challenge lies in ensuring that all reporting adheres to the precise requirements of the relevant regulatory bodies, such as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, under acts like the Clean Water Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, without undue delay or omission. The pressure to manage public perception and internal operational efficiency must not compromise legal and ethical reporting duties. The correct approach involves immediate and accurate reporting to the designated regulatory authorities, as mandated by law, regardless of internal discussions or preliminary assessments. This aligns with the principle of transparency and accountability central to environmental law. Specifically, regulations often stipulate strict timelines for reporting spills or releases of hazardous substances. Failure to report within these windows, or providing incomplete information, can lead to significant penalties, including fines and legal action, and can damage the company's reputation and its license to operate. Adhering to these reporting requirements is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental ethical and legal obligation. An incorrect approach would be to delay reporting pending further internal investigation, or to attempt to downplay the severity of the incident before official notification. This could violate the spirit and letter of environmental laws that prioritize prompt notification to allow regulatory bodies to assess and mitigate potential harm. Another incorrect approach would be to only report the incident through internal channels without external notification, assuming internal management will handle external communication. This bypasses the direct legal obligation to inform the relevant government agencies, which are the primary recipients of such information for oversight and enforcement purposes. Furthermore, selectively reporting only minor aspects of the incident or omitting crucial details would constitute a failure to provide complete and accurate information, which is also a violation of reporting requirements. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific reporting obligations under applicable environmental laws, establishing clear internal protocols for incident identification and reporting, and empowering personnel to act decisively and in accordance with these protocols. When an incident occurs, the immediate step should be to secure the area, assess the situation to the extent possible without delaying reporting, and then initiate the legally mandated reporting process without waiting for internal approvals that are not legally required for initial notification. Consulting with legal and environmental compliance departments is crucial, but this should supplement, not replace, the direct regulatory reporting obligation. Question 18. When evaluating the implementation of a novel extraction technique at a Freeport McMoRan facility, what is the most responsible approach to ensure compliance with environmental regulations? Option A. Initiate the new extraction process and address any environmental issues that emerge during operation. Option B. Rely on existing environmental permits, assuming they cover the new extraction technique without further review. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment and secure all necessary permits and approvals before commencing the new extraction process. Option D. Prioritize the rapid deployment of the new extraction technique to maximize immediate economic gains, deferring detailed environmental reviews until later. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment and secure all necessary permits and approvals before commencing the new extraction process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Freeport McMoRan employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The need to balance operational efficiency with adherence to environmental regulations requires careful judgment and a thorough understanding of applicable laws. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential environmental risks associated with a new mining process and implementing mitigation strategies before commencing operations. This aligns with the precautionary principle often embedded in environmental regulations, which mandates taking preventative action in the face of uncertainty. Specifically, under U.S. environmental law, such as the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and the Clean Water Act, companies are required to assess environmental impacts and obtain necessary permits. A proactive approach demonstrates good corporate citizenship and a commitment to regulatory compliance, minimizing the risk of future penalties, operational disruptions, and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the new mining process and then address any environmental concerns that arise. This demonstrates a reactive stance and a disregard for regulatory requirements. Such an approach risks significant violations of environmental laws, leading to fines, injunctions, and mandatory remediation efforts. It also exposes Freeport McMoRan to substantial reputational harm and potential legal challenges from stakeholders. Another incorrect approach is to assume that existing environmental permits are sufficient for the new process, without conducting a thorough review and obtaining any necessary amendments or new permits. This is a failure to recognize that changes in operational processes can trigger new regulatory obligations. Regulatory frameworks typically require companies to notify authorities and obtain approval for significant changes that could impact the environment. Ignoring this can lead to non-compliance and penalties. Finally, an incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of implementation over environmental due diligence, believing that the potential economic benefits outweigh the need for thorough environmental assessment. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate responsibility and the legal framework governing environmental protection. Regulatory bodies view such a prioritization as a deliberate attempt to circumvent compliance, which can result in severe consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to all applicable regulations before initiating new projects or processes. This involves consulting with legal and environmental experts, conducting thorough risk assessments, and engaging with regulatory agencies as needed. The framework should emphasize a culture of compliance and ethical conduct, where regulatory adherence is seen as an integral part of successful business operations, not an impediment. Question 19. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Freeport McMoRan is considering modifications to its tailings management facility that may alter its operational footprint and potentially impact nearby water sources. To ensure full compliance with environmental regulations and maintain operational integrity, which of the following actions represents the most prudent and legally sound approach? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of all applicable federal and state environmental regulations, consult with environmental law experts, and proactively engage with the relevant regulatory agencies to seek guidance and confirm compliance requirements before proceeding with any modifications. Option B. Delay any modifications until a comprehensive, multi-year environmental impact study is completed, even if the proposed changes are minor and do not appear to pose significant risks, to avoid any potential regulatory scrutiny. Option C. Immediately implement the proposed modifications, assuming that existing environmental permits are sufficiently broad to cover these changes, and address any potential regulatory concerns that may arise post-implementation. Option D. Proceed with the modifications based on historical operational practices, relying on the company's internal environmental team's assessment without seeking external validation or direct communication with regulatory bodies. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement the proposed modifications, assuming that existing environmental permits are sufficiently broad to cover these changes, and address any potential regulatory concerns that may arise post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing interests, the company's operational needs and potential environmental impacts, while adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. Freeport McMoRan, as a large mining operation, faces constant scrutiny regarding its environmental stewardship and compliance with federal and state laws. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying complex regulations to a specific, evolving operational context, ensuring that decisions are not only legally sound, but also ethically responsible and aligned with best industry practices. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintended consequences and maintain public trust. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive engagement with the relevant regulatory bodies. This means initiating early and transparent communication, providing detailed information about the proposed operational changes, and actively seeking clarification on compliance requirements. This approach demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and fosters a collaborative relationship with oversight agencies, which is crucial for long-term operational stability and risk mitigation. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of environmental due diligence and corporate responsibility mandated by regulations such as the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and various state-level environmental protection statutes. These frameworks emphasize the importance of anticipating and mitigating environmental harm through informed decision-making and stakeholder engagement. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with operational changes based on a superficial understanding of the regulations, or by assuming existing permits cover the new activities without explicit confirmation. This could lead to violations, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to delay or withhold information from regulatory agencies, which undermines transparency and can be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent oversight. Such actions violate the spirit and letter of environmental laws that require full disclosure and cooperation. Furthermore, relying solely on internal legal counsel's interpretation without seeking external validation or direct agency guidance can be risky, as it may not capture the nuances of regulatory intent or evolving agency interpretations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes thorough research, consultation, and documentation. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable federal, state, and local environmental regulations. 2. Consulting with environmental compliance specialists and legal counsel. 3. Engaging in direct communication with relevant regulatory agencies to seek clarification and confirm compliance pathways. 4. Documenting all communications, analyses, and decisions. 5. Implementing a robust internal review process before proceeding with any significant operational changes. Question 20. Analysis of a situation at a Freeport McMoRan mining site where an unexpected operational issue requires immediate attention, potentially impacting the timely submission of critical environmental monitoring data to the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, under U.S. federal regulations. The site manager is pushing for a rapid resolution of the operational issue, suggesting that the environmental data submission can be finalized with preliminary figures and adjusted later once the operational disruption is fully resolved. As the compliance officer, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure adherence to U.S. environmental law and company policy? Option A. Prioritize resolving the operational issue first, and then dedicate resources to collecting and verifying the environmental data for submission. Option B. Submit the environmental data using the preliminary figures, and if questioned by the EPA, explain the operational urgency that necessitated the initial submission. Option C. Halt all non-essential operations until the environmental data is fully verified and accurately submitted, even if this causes significant operational delays. Option D. Proceed with submitting the environmental data using the best available preliminary figures, with a commitment to submit revised data as soon as operational issues are resolved. Correct answer is D. Proceed with submitting the environmental data using the best available preliminary figures, with a commitment to submit revised data as soon as operational issues are resolved. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a compliance officer at Freeport McMoRan due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the stringent requirements of environmental regulations. The company's commitment to responsible mining practices, as mandated by U.S. federal environmental laws, necessitates a thorough and accurate reporting process. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of operational needs with the meticulous data collection and verification required to ensure compliance, preventing potential legal repercussions, fines, and reputational damage. The correct approach involves prioritizing the integrity of environmental data reporting, even if it introduces temporary operational delays. This aligns with the core principles of environmental compliance under U.S. federal law, such as the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, which demand accurate monitoring and reporting of emissions and discharges. By ensuring data accuracy through rigorous verification, The compliance officer upholds their ethical duty to the company and to regulatory bodies, safeguarding against violations and fostering long-term sustainability. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate operational resumption over data verification would fail to meet regulatory standards. This could lead to inaccurate reporting, which is a direct violation of federal environmental statutes. Such a failure could result in significant penalties, including civil fines and potential criminal charges, as well as damage to Freeport McMoRan's public image and stakeholder trust. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to expedite the verification process by cutting corners or relying on incomplete data, also constitutes a regulatory failure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the thoroughness required by environmental laws, exposing the company to undue risk. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes risk assessment and adherence to regulatory mandates. This involves understanding the specific requirements of applicable environmental laws, evaluating the potential consequences of non-compliance, and communicating transparently with operational teams about the necessity of regulatory adherence. The framework should prioritize ethical conduct and the long-term viability of the company over short-term operational gains when faced with potential regulatory breaches.